It's easy for us to say that somebody on the side of the road arguing with himself is different. But we all talk to ourselves in some form or another, internally or externally, going over things we should have said, or conversations we could have had, or in preparation for the future and things we want to say. Take this presentation, for example. I practiced sitting at a table having lunch and walking down the street. And even at this very moment, I'm literally talking to an inanimate object in a room all alone. But you wouldn't diagnose me with schizophrenia, which is what I'm going to be talking about today because it's simply the most fascinating of all psychological conditions. So I'm going to break it down like this and first talk about the diagnostic criteria used to determine whether somebody has schizophrenia or not. Now, with any diagnosis, there's a level of subjectivity, so I'm going to go over the assessment methods used to evaluate this criteria. It is important to realize that even with the most reliable and accurate assessment, our diagnosis is still at best an estimate. But it's further important to recognize that even at its worst, it is the most useful tool to treat a troubled mind, which is why we'll go into the treatment, and from my research, I would like to leave you with my impressions. So, the diagnostic criteria for schizophrenia, there's 5 symptoms, and someone will need one of the first 3, which is either delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized thoughts. And they'll have to show signs of one more of either these 3 or also grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior or negative symptoms. Now, in order to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, these symptoms need to persist for 6 months. Hallucinations are often thought of as visual experiences in the absence of external stimuli, but with schizophrenia, the hallucinations are usually auditory, such as hearing voices that are distinct from one's own thoughts. Now, obviously, we do not have access to someone's thoughts, but we do have access to their speech. So we will say they have disorganized thoughts based on speech patterns such as loose associations, fragmented speech, and incoherence. Grossly disorganized behavior is colloquially thought of as being out of it, such as holding an absurd position for a long period of time, or repetitive movements, or just inappropriate gestures for the situation. Now, in the acute phase, somebody clearly shows all the signs of schizophrenia. And the most important thing is to have a safe environment. So we need to minimize harm. And it's important to realize that somebody diagnosed with schizophrenia is much more likely to be a victim of violence than a perpetrator. And this goes along with the psychoeducation of mainly the family members at this stage. So they understand the disorder, they understand the possible side effects of any antipsychotic medications that they may be taking, and understand the stigma that comes along with this. And lastly, it's important to reduce expressed emotion, which is simply not being critical and blaming one another. In the second phase, stabilization phase, it's more important than anything to just relax and reduce stress. This can be achieved with meditation, as can help with every possible psychological condition. And we need to continue psychoeducation, family support, and helping connect with outreach programs that the community may have. And it's also important to promote recovery at this stage, although there is no full recovery until the 3rd stage, which is going to ultimately end with finding employment and integrating back into society. And we do this by preventing relapse and going over different methods, and the techniques we use usually come from cognitive or behavior, or both cognitive and behavior therapy, which is simply to change the belief structures and challenge maladaptive beliefs. And lastly, the skills training needed or to either learn or relearn to function in society. So to leave you with my impressions, I want to go over what I believe is that science is a paradigm, meaning that in order to accept it, you have to agree that there is a universe outside of your mind and that you have direct access to it. And in order to function in the psychopathology, the paradigm here is that there is such thing as a normal mind. Either of these are arguable, but stepping into that paradigm, you need to accept it. But when we do accept it, we are accepting an absolute truth, meaning that we cannot function with a slippery slope. So a problem for psychopathology is that we have this shared delusion disorder where somebody can be diagnosed with a delusion that they have from somebody else that has some sort of dominant relationship over them and is able to pass their delusions on to them. Yet at the same time, a delusion cannot be a widely held cultural belief. So for me, this is a slippery slope that I have a hard time dealing with, because at what number of people believing something does the delusion become acceptable? Right? In other words, how do we distinguish a cult from culture? This ties into my values, both as a psychologist, where I need to remain culturally sensitive, and as an animal liberation activist, where I abstain from the exploitation of animals. And if for some reason I cannot abide by both of these, I must voice my concern. Now, over half the people on earth accept this delusion as truth. And there's a bigger problem than just the fact that it's a logical impossibility. But this demonstrates complete and utter apathy for other living beings, which implicates far more than a troubled mind, but a threat for humanity. We are destroying our bodies, other lives, and our planet with every day we do not address this. The good news is that research shows that if we eliminate the dominant force creating these delusions, those affected by it will recover quickly. Thank you for listening.